Okay, perfect. Okay, so hi everyone, and welcome to today's class of the Bioregions course. Today we have as guests two distinguished experts, starting with Kate Raworth. So welcome, Kate. Thank you for being here. And we also will have a second session with Erinch Sahan, both integral parts of the Doughnut Economics movement. So Kate is an ecological economist focused on making economics fit for 21st century realities. She is a creator of the Doughnut of Social and Planetary Boundaries. She's a senior associate at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute, where she teaches on the Masters in Environmental Change and Management. She is also a professor of practice at Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences. So thank you, Kate, for being here. Over to you, Tom, to make a brief introduction as well.
Sure. Thank you, Jose. And of course, thank you, Kate, for joining us and all the DEAL team. It's quite a deal to have you joining the Master in Design for Distributed Innovation, and also, of course, in some way, the Fab City Global Initiative, which I think we both, our teams, I think, share similar paths on trying to make something impossible happen, no? Which is trying to change how our economy works, and also trying to change how we produce and consume things in our planet, no? I just wanted to say a brief comment on behalf also of Tomás Vivanco, Tomás and I, who you see in the screen as well. We are the co-directors of the program. And Tomás is in Chile now. I am in Bali, Indonesia. We have students from all over the world, in the Middle East, in Europe, in South America, in the United States, in China. And we're trying to create a space in which ideas flow, and also those ideas can be translated into action by those students that are part of local Fab City ecosystems, that are connected with maker spaces, or that they're just trying to make something happen in their own context, no? So as you can imagine, it's quite intersectional and relevant to be more, I would say, firsthand in contact with what your work is, not only from the point of view of, what Mo was showing your book before. We all have checked your book and your videos. We have enjoyed the big idea of the donut, but also we are really fascinated on how to see it in action and start to learn from how those first experiences are happening, no? And I think with the curiosity that it entails, no, to be honest, it's the same with Fab City. We're trying to do something. We're starting to see little green sprouts, but we are trying to figuring it out at the same time, no? So welcome to this space of curiosity, of exchange, and yeah, I hope that we can contaminate each other. Thank you. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks so much, Thomas. It's great to be with you again and to meet everybody on this call. Thank you. Lovely to meet the students of distributed design. May there be more courses with that name in the world. My goodness, that feels like the future I want to be part of. So it's lovely to join you. I'm going to present for about 30 minutes about the core ideas of Doughnut Economics, if they're familiar or not familiar, just to bring them back, and we can just have the discussion after that. And then my colleague Erinch will join you to talk about particularly about putting these ideas into practice in the world of business. What I hope you'll see is the crossover and the profound connection between what the Fab City philosophy and movement is trying to do and what we're trying to do. And I just love what Thomas just said, trying to make something impossible happen. Thank you. That is exactly it. And you know what? Sometimes things that are impossible, they start to happen because they really want to happen. And I think these are the worlds we live in. So with that, let me share my screen. I'm not seeing a screen. Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. Right. So I'm going to just talk about putting these core ideas, these core ideas at the heart of Doughnut Economics. And I'm going to start with not Doughnut Economics. I'm going to start with the economics I was taught at university, and probably any of you, if you ever studied economics at university, this would be what you were probably taught. 20th century thinking that still dominates mainstream economic education. Let's do a recap. It starts with supply and demand. So it starts with the market. It starts with price as the metric of concern. It puts markets at the center of our vision. And As you well know, that is a very specific choice. Why do we focus on the market? It's only one way in which we can exchange to provision for our needs and wants. The self-portrait of humanity, it's rational economic man, standing alone. He's got money in his hand, ego in his heart, a calculator in his head, and nature at his feet. He hates work. He loves luxury. He knows the price of everything, and he can never get enough. And if we continue to tell ourselves that this is who we are, we stand zero chance, really, of thriving together on this planet. This is not who we are. This is what was convenient to stick at the heart of economic models, but it actually remakes us. We start to mimic him when we are shown him again and again. So we need new visions of who we are and can be. And then the goal in the 20th century economic mindset is, of course, growth endlessly. I'm sitting here in the UK, one of the richest countries in the history of humankind. We are coming up to an election, and the leaders of both major opposition parties, Conservatives and Labour, they say growth, growth, growth is the mantra. So we're still stuck in this. And this is what we need to get past. I love the inspiration of Bucky Fuller. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. You don't change things by fighting the existing reality. You've got to build something new to make that existing model obsolete. Let's be clear, we need to fight against the old system, against oppressive systems, but we need to fight for something. So what are you for? And I know the Fab City movement knows as well as us that when you can show people, well, this is what we're for, their eyes widen, their hearts open, and they're motivated to change in a completely different way than if you only focus on what you're against and what's wrong with the old. So Doughnut Economics is about showing what we're for and showing that it's being put into practice. This is a summary of my book. For people who like a one-pager, this is the one-pager. It's about 7 ways to think, going from the old way to the new way. And as you can see, I tell the story mostly in pictures because pictures are so powerful. They shape how we see the world literally in our visual cortex, what we center and what we leave at the periphery, what's visible, what's left invisible. Pictures matter. So I'm seeking to rewrite the world with pictures. And by taking away some of the very politicized, historic, ideologized language, we find we can get into conversation with more people who otherwise wouldn't be there. So we use new language too. So let's start. The first way, forget that goal of endless growth. It just doesn't serve us and it doesn't make sense on a thriving, dynamic, delicately balanced planet. Let's go instead for thriving. In this donut-shaped space, we got to leave no one in the hole in the middle. That's where people fall short on life's essentials. Leave nobody without the essentials of life. So everyone has sufficient resources to meet their essential needs. But don't overshoot that ecological ceiling. That's where we put so much pressure on the planet. We start to break down her life-supporting systems. These are the 9 planetary boundaries. We've got to learn to thrive. So this is the shape of progress, like a heartbeat. We know it in our own bodies. Health lies in balance. Can we take what we bodily deeply know from the human body to the planetary body? If we're going to go for this shape of progress, we have to recognize that this is not new. Indigenous cultures from many different parts of the world have, for millennia, visualized, depicted health, well-being, thriving as a dynamic circle. So the donut is a Western conceptual mindset recovering from that goal of endless growth. And I see it as a bridge between the world of growth in which many of us have been raised, moving back towards that indigenous wisdom that's been held for millennia. Can we find our own way back towards that? So I offer it as a bridge between these worlds, if it's useful for you. If that's where we want to get to, that's very far from where we are now. All of the red here shows the quantification of human shortfall in the middle and ecological overshoot. Billions of people fall short on life's essentials. We want to eliminate all of the red from the center of the circle. And we are already overshooting at least 6 of these 9 planetary boundaries. So just on this image, I often stop and just say, you know, last century's economic theorists never saw this. This is new quantification. This is new data. They never saw this. So we'd be crazy to think that last century's economic theories were going to solve this. They weren't designed for it. Likewise, last century's government policies, they didn't see this, they're not a response to this. They are not going to turn this around. Last century's business models, last century's designs, none of them were designed with this in front of us. We need to see this and come up with new theories, new policies, new business designs, new designs of the systems on which we depend. What kind of systems will help us turn the story around? That, for me, is the work. We know from the headlines every day the reality of this. How do we stay alive to it? How do we stay empathetic rather than apathetic to the extremes of ecological degradation that are here and extremes of inequity that are here? And I say this sitting in the United Kingdom, very aware of my position in the historical circumstance that led to this. So where would we then begin? Well, let's begin by going from the global down to the national, because we're coming closer to local decision-making. Here are 4 national donuts created by a group of researchers, including my colleague, Andrew Fanning. Malawi, massive human shortfall, not overshooting their share of planetary boundaries. China, a double whammy challenge, human shortfall and ecological overshoot. The UK, where I am, some inequality and significant overshoot. And then the US, which looks quite like Canada, which looks quite like Australia, has high inequality society, but massive ecological overshoot. So none of these countries are living in the donut. They all need to transform. Indeed, there's no country in the world that we know from the data that lives in the donut. Here's a selection of around 50 of the 150 that have been downscaled this way. So the place where everybody wants to be or should be aiming to be is that green donut, where you rise up to meet the needs of all of your people, but you do so coming back within the planetary boundaries. So the first thing we notice, Costa Rica is closest. Second thing we can notice, whenever you hear yourself or somebody else talking about developed countries or advanced nations, you can say, I'm sorry, where do you mean? Where are you talking about? Which developed country? I don't see any developed countries here. I mean, Costa Rica is closest, but there's no country here that should be calling itself developed. There's absolutely nothing developed about overshooting planetary boundaries. You're breaking down the life support systems of the Earth, and you're undermining the chances of all other low-income countries that need the stability of the Earth. So also let's recognize that these countries are not separate, even though they're separated little dots on a scatter plot. They're profoundly interconnected, from histories of colonialism through to the current and future impacts of climate change. So this is about a story of interrelationship. This is where the history of pursuing economic growth has taken us. And let's recognize in countries like Malawi, starting on a very low income per person, doubling national income is massively transformative. Kids survive, they go to school, people have dignified lives, access to healthcare, housing, decent jobs. It's transformative at those low levels of income. But instead of rising up and then meeting the needs of all people within the means of the planet, countries, as we can see historically, have taken that additional income and just go straight past that point, spending the additional income on excessive energy and material use and causing ecological overshoot. So just going for growth is not taking us anywhere close to where we want to be. In fact, it's taking us straight past it. So can we turn this story around? Can instead low-income nations today, can they be the rise nations that find ways to meet the needs of all of their people without overshooting planetary boundaries in the way that all before them have done? That is an unprecedented path. Middle-income nations, can these stop shooting past that spot and actually aim into it? Can they reorient? This has not been done before. There's no precedent to follow. And the high-income nations, can they massively reduce all of that very throbbing red overshoot and come back within planetary boundaries while finally meeting the needs of all of their people, because they certainly have the means to do so? This too has not yet been done. So we're on all unprecedented journeys. I think it calls every country to have both humility, but also enormous ambition, and to realize that every nation can learn from nations very different from itself. We also need to rebalance between these nations, whether that's reparations or redistribution of wealth and power and technology, and transforming the rules of finance and trade and intellectual property. That rebalancing is going to be key for countries to be willing to move in these directions, amongst others. So how would we get there? What would be the way we begin economics? Well, for me, the first diagram would never be supply and demand. It's far too narrow a mindset as a starting point. I begin here. Call this the embedded economy diagram. Let's start with the biggest picture. The economy is a subsystem of society, of course. It's a totally human invention. And the beautiful news there is that we can reinvent it. And human society is a subsystem of the living world. We are part of nature, utterly dependent upon the rest of her web of life. We're bathed in this river of solar energy. We draw in materials and matter. We put out waste and pollution. We must make our economies compatible with the life systems on which we depend. This is the 101 starting point of ecological economics. And within the economy, so yes, let's add the social systems and the living world, but within the economy, yeah, there's the market and there's the state, and the 20th century got obsessed with this ideological boxing match: free market, laissez-faire capitalism, state-loving socialism. Which side are you on? Ignoring the unpaid caring work of the household. Thomas, as a father of 2 little girls, really knows the unpaid caring work of the household, as do all parents and children and partners and carers on this call. And the commons, which is at the center of your work. The commons, which brings together people to co-create value that they collectively share and steward, without maybe the market or the state being involved. So how do we make economies that make space for all of these ingenious forms of provisioning? I don't want to live in a society that lacks any one of them. I know they are all valuable, but my goodness, we have been dominated by markets and need to rebalance. And then there's finance. What would it mean for finance, which is entirely invented? What would it mean for finance to be in service to these forms of provisioning, in service to thriving life? That, for me, is really the 21st century economic question. I wish all high school students were equipped with this and say, go forth. Whatever you do, contribute to this. So we need to change the dynamics. We know that. And it's not the dynamic of growth that should be at the heart of our vision. And I know what I'm sharing here is profoundly familiar to the world of design in Fab City. As I share this, I invite you, if you ever find this way of explaining it useful, these slides are in the Commons. You are welcome to please draw on them. There's nothing more we can do better than to share ideas and interchange. So we need to move from degenerative, take, make, use, lose systems, bend those arrows around, to regenerative, cyclical, circular. Some examples I often share just from urban regenerative design, whether it's retrofit and renovation. You know, in this country, in the UK, if you want to build a new building, there's no value-added tax charged. If you want to retrofit an existing building, you pay 20% value-added tax. So the government is disadvantaging this massively. It's insane. We need to transform that. An example of circular construction from Amsterdam, a district in which all the buildings there experimentally are being circular by design to kickstart the learning in that city, from the architects to the planners, to get it ahead, and so that they can really make circular design a reality. From passive housing in New York to this sponge city in Kunli, recognizing the waters will come, so absorb them rather than resist them. How can we build in ways that recognize we're embedded in local ecology? If we're talking circular futures, and I know this is profoundly familiar to you, I created this very simple way of telling the story to people outside of this field. Which kind of circularity are we currently making? There's a real risk we're making this corporate circularity. Every company for itself, send it back to me. I will control it. It's closed, it's protected, it's proprietary. I won't tell you how I did it. And I think that the open design movement, the Fab City movement, is the most beautiful example of the common circularity, of recognizing we will only be circular if we are creating an ecosystem of circularity, because that's what nature shows us. That's how it works. So we need the deeper designs to make it an ecosystem of circularity. And along with degenerative to regenerative, we need to recognize we've inherited divisive economies that capture value and opportunity in the hands of a few, whether through regulation, through inheritance and privilege, through the coding of capital, through infrastructure. There's no way we can get into the donut with the extremes of inequality locally and nationally and globally that the world has now. We need to create distributive economies that share value and opportunity with all who co-create it. So again, I come back to urban design because it's familiar to many people. Oh, social housing in Vienna. Did you know that more than 60% of people live in city-owned housing because the city decided that housing is not a luxury investment asset, it's a human right for all. And so they decided to own the housing in a way that made that possible. I love these half houses by Alejandro Aravena. People can't afford a whole house. Hey, maybe they can afford half a house. He started building half houses full of all the energy, the water, piping that you need. And as you save up money, you can fill the rest of the house in. And of course, this just opened up home ownership to people who otherwise would have been stuck in the renters market forever. Community Self-Build in Lewisham. This is a community, a Black-led community in London who built their own homes, which they now live in as residents. And oh, if that project, which happened, I think, about 15, 20 years ago, if already existed WikiHouse, imagine how much easier that would have been, right? The beautiful open design of WikiHouse, very connected to your world again, of sharing the distributive nature of the ideas and the designs and build them everywhere. So this is why you can imagine I'm just a fan of this diagram, and I'm very often showing it because for me, it moves from the globalized production that is degenerative, that is divisive, to cosmolocal production, distributive and regenerative. And I became actually a bit of an evangelist for Fab City. There's so many presentations I've gone into. You just have to know about cosmolocal production. If you remember one thing I say, cosmolocal production, people. So I love this, and I love the clear connection between the work. So let me just pull back. I started with 20th century economics, and I started there because it's still there. It's still what's taught. Students still come up to me every day and say, you know, that thing you were talking about from the past, it's what I've just been examined in. We need to move to recognizing embedded economy, humans in the web of life, and the goal of thriving. So let me turn to Milton Friedman for a moment, father of neoliberalism. Let's learn from him because he won. He succeeded in his campaign, and he said, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. And when that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend upon the ideas that are lying around. He had his ideas lying around. Hayek's book on the road to serfdom, he had seeded neoliberal thinking so that when Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan came to power in 1980, I remember I was 10 years old, they could bring it to life on the international stage, and the rest is our history. But why would you leave your ideas only lying around? We want them up and running, right? And that's what you guys are doing, and that's what we're doing. Let's get them up and running so that people can see them in practice, proof of practice, because we know the crises are coming. They're happening all the time. And we know that in crisis, people do, as Milton said, they look for other possibilities. Let's show them other things that are already possible. So that's why we've taken Doughnut Economics from when it came out in 2017. I was thrilled. It's now been published in over 20 languages. But the really thrilling part is when people would just get in touch and say, I'm a teacher. I'm already teaching this. It's not on the syllabus, but it's what the students should learn. I'm a mayor. Can we do this in my town? I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a community activist. How can I do this here? So we set up Doughnut Economics Action Lab to put these ideas into practice, to show and learn from practitioners. How do you do this? How do you start? So I'm just going to share one example from our city's work. And then Erinch, my colleague, will jump on and share a whole load more from the world of business and enterprise. So we get contacted all the time by mayors, councillors, local officers. It's usually subnational because they're not addicted to growth in the way that national economies are. I wish it were more bioregional, right? And this is the bioregional matter story. There's a few examples that are bioregional, but of course, we have political structures that are not bioregional. They are divided politically. And so it's those people who are appointed who usually show up. What would it mean to do this in our city or our town or our district or our county? So we created a tool together with Janine Benyus of Biomimicry Thinking. And we say, well, first we want to unroll the donut. Let's make some space. And between the foundation and the ceiling there, we have a small question to ask you. Of course, it's not really a small question. It's a massive question. How can our city become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? Complex question, you can feel it. So let's divide it into what we call the 4 lenses. You've got the local, about the aspirations of what it will be like here, and then the global, recognizing our responsibilities and our connections to people worldwide. So I'll just show you each one of these four in order to give a feeling. And I invite you to think of a place you know, where you live, where you grew up. Just what would it mean through these lenses to transform that place? So one, how can everybody in this city thrive? What does it mean here, whether you're in Dar es Salaam or Stockholm or Dubai or Togo in Lomé? What does it mean here to thrive? What do we aspire that everybody should have that minimum standard of life across all these dimensions shown at the bottom? Who is currently falling short on that, and what policies need to be put into place to make that possible? And then let's add thinking about our local ecology. How can our city be as generous as the wildland next door? The wildland is different everywhere on Earth. Nature's adapted to every locality, up a mountain, in a valley, in the tropics, in the temperate. But everywhere she's figured out how to create conditions conducive to life. This is what comes from Janine Benyus. Nature cleanses the air and houses biodiversity. She welcomes wildlife. She harvests energy. She stores carbon. So can we observe the generosity of the nearby nature wherever you are? And what would it mean for our cities, our settlements, our towns, our agriculture to be as generous as that? Can we make cities that store carbon, that welcome wildlife, that harvest the water, that harvest the energy? How do we design to have the generous functioning of nature? That will make us far more resilient to climate impacts, for sure. So those are the local. Now let's go global, right? How can our city respect the health of the whole planet? We know that in every city, everywhere, people are purchasing, consuming goods, services, and because of the PITO, product in, trash out, supply chains we have, they are having impacts worldwide. We know that, and it's happening everywhere. And those impacts may be local to a place or across the other side of the world. How do we create circular, cyclical, regenerative economies? And Fab City is right on this. Like, let's stop having those impacts worldwide. Let's bring that production local. So coming back within planetary boundaries, reducing that red overshoot, especially in high-income countries. And while we're thinking of those global connections, let's also think of our global connections to people worldwide. So the choices we make, whether we buy things through global supply chains, it impacts people's rights, their labor rights, their pay and conditions. The lifestyles we lead here are impacting people through climate change now. Our engagement with knowledge, whether we share knowledge through university scholarships or open design, impacts on what people can and can't know in other parts of the world. Again, open design is key for this one. What's the connection to migrants? What's the welcome, the policy, the culture of welcome? And then how are we embedded in policy regimes that mean we are caught in systems that make us complicit in violence and exploitation elsewhere? So we can put these four together, and you can see there's a lot going on here, right? And sometimes people say, oh, it's too much. Well, we could say, okay, which bit should we ignore? Which bit should we just like not look at? And of course, if you don't look at it, it doesn't go away. It just doesn't get handled, and it'll come back and hit us. So we invite this. It's like a holistic check. At the very least, use it as a holistic check for anything you're designing, imagining a future of a place or a future of a sector. Place it at the center. Reimagining our city's future of food, or housing, or transport, or manufacturing. How could it be done differently? How can we design? How can we make a Fab City? You could just put a Fab City concept here, right at the center. And how can we do that in a way that does enable everyone here to thrive and does make us generous like the wildland next door and does respect the health of the whole planet and people worldwide? What else could we do in the way we design it to have more positive impacts that help bring us and others into the donut from all those sides? Couple of examples, because there's over 80 local and city regional governments around the world engaging with Doughnut Economics. You can see many of them are in Europe, and I think that's got a understandable history. I'm based in the UK. Amsterdam was the first city to pick it up. Peer-to-peer inspiration meant like cities inspired other like cities, and it spread, but it's also in Ipoh, Malaysia, El Monte in Chile, Mexico City. So we're thrilled to see these ideas spreading in Bhutan. And in some places where I know the Fab City movement also has traction, and it makes sense, right? Because this idea would appeal to the same kind of people who see the power of that. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. Barcelona is one of the cities in Europe that is engaged with the concept. They've, as you can see on the left there, they've quantified them, they're all of those 4 lenses, literally asking themselves in depth and creating their own city donut of all the overshoot, using this as a compass now towards 2050. Can we come back within this donut? And how do we use this to create a culture of sustainability here in the city, along with the Fab City momentum and many, many other initiatives that are making this, I think, a leading city in Europe for transformation. A very different location, Thimphu in Bhutan. And there, again, I know another Fab City place, redesigning the city plan for Thimphu, which has begun to sprawl and losing some of the cultural principles. The government of Bhutan said, we see in Doughnut Economics something that really resonates with our concept of gross national happiness. We want to do what they called gross national happiness in the donut. Can we combine them? Again, it's that sense of bridging between conceptual worlds. So they've been using the concepts and principles in their own design. And we ran some training workshops for around 80 Bhutanese civil servants, introducing the principles of Doughnut Economics to see how can this serve you in your work and how can it accompany your own profound concepts in transforming the future for Bhutan. If this is interesting, we've released a report, Cities and Regions, Let's Get Started, that just shows how we're learning back from all of these places. We're not telling them how to get started. They know how to get started. They know their context. So we learn back from them and then share back. These are the 9 ways that we've seen it happening. And my colleague Leonora is now making an update of this to share in more depth, because we know the power of peer-to-peer inspiration. I bet you see it in your movement, right? I can talk about what a city could do, but it's nothing compared to what a mayor stands up and says, this is why we're doing the donut. So we love to amplify the voices of pioneers. I'm going to stop here, and because I know you're going to speak with Erin soon about what it means in the world of business. How do we go into the deep design of business itself? But if you're interested in any of the ideas or the tools I've just shared, please come to our platform, doughuteconomics.org. All of these tools that are on the page are in the commons. And I would love for us to make more and more connections in design and in the practice of designers currently doing this masters. Please take these tools, combine it, use it where it's useful, bring it into your own work. I think like Fab City, we believe that the way that ideas need to spread and scale at these times, at the speed that these times demand, we, like you, believe it has to be through the commons. And that's why we have a shared vision of putting ideas out there. So I'm going to stop now. I really welcome questions, comments, discussion for the next quarter of an hour until Erin joins us.
Fantastic, Kate. Thank you very much, as usual. I'm gonna, while everybody else starts to warm up, I see more already with the hand raise and also Ginger. I'm gonna very, very quickly, a very fast question from my side. It also comes from our own curiosity in Fab City, and some of our findings is that cities are small enough to think that you can do things easily, but they're big enough to get lost in the bureaucracy and some kind of the major handling. So we're kind of slightly moving to this hyper local scale and thinking about how we can do more things at the neighborhood scale, the street level, no, like how things can happen where you can talk to people, but at the same time thinking about this bioregional scale, right? Like which are the implications in the larger systems. What is your? I know that you have had like a similar experience on like keeping traction with cities might be challenging sometimes. How you are approaching this smaller scale of things, and also at the same time how this bioregion scale, because I see also other cities moving into more or sending more like a metropolitan areas and start to include,
Yes.
Like a larger area. So do you think also a trend in this? From your
Great
practice?
great question. And actually it would only come from people doing similar kind of work, right? Because I like what you said, it's small enough to believe they can do it, but big enough to get lost in the bureaucracy. So let me think. Neighborhood scale. So we're not leading this work. It's change makers in a place say we're going to start this here. So we're just following and seeing where that energy comes. At the neighborhood scale, it's Civic Square in Birmingham, who are doing it at a literally street level retrofit, and they're doing incredible work bringing these ideas in. For others who might know, they're very closely related to Dark Matter Labs, and they work very closely with WikiHouse. So they're an amazing community-based organization that's really tapped into these wider, deeper design ideas. So Civic Square in Birmingham are doing that neighborhood scale work. for us in cities, yes, it absolutely can get lost. It can get lost in the skies of bureaucracy. It can also get lost because cities have elections every 4 years, and maybe the champion gets elected out, or it gets into one department. So Amsterdam, the city of Amsterdam, it was introduced in their circularity policy. And actually what happened in the media loved it. So they wrote about it and they overstayed everything. Oh, Amsterdam is dropping capitalism and doing the donut instead. You know, they like, it sounds like a good headline. Let's just write it. So people say, where is it? I expect to see the entire city transformed. But of course, it's in one part of the city. And then you need change makers in that part to move it. And where else does it get picked up? And we often don't know. And it's now being used in different departments in the city because it's spread from person to person as an intention and ambition. Often it's smaller towns that are picking it up. Tomelilla in Sweden is doing some really interesting work. And my colleague Leonora is accompanying a lot of cities that are bringing it. So it disappears because it disappears because it becomes invisible to the public, but it goes inside the city decision-making processes. So some places in Cornwall, Tomelilla and others are saying we want to use this to turn it into a decision-making tool that will change how we allocate budgets. So there comes a time where you say, well, I can't see any change happening because it's in the city processes. So it takes time. So we're looking at all those different levels. And yes, some places like Brussels and Amsterdam say, we don't just want to be Amsterdam City or Brussels City. It's the capital region because we also have that level of governance. And of course, they recognize this is our food, right? A supply. This is the water we depend upon. People are migrating in and out or commuting in and out daily. So of course cities are like one of the most profound, complex, adaptive systems. And I hugely admire people whose role it is to really help manage a cityscape. It's got the entire of humanity in it. And they see the interconnectedness. So many counties and districts come to us and they say, well, we are here to do Yorkshire or this whole county, the county of Cornwall, rural areas, precisely integrating the rural and the urban, but they're still not yet divided on the bioregional. So there's more community-led work that says, can we do this on a bioregional basis at the water system level? But you know as well as we do that the challenge of bringing people together around a lake is still really high for many.
Oh, fantastic, thank you. I will stop here myself. I will leave it to Mo and then after Ginger to make comments, questions. So you can go both. Thank you, and then afterwards, Kate maybe can react to those.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Kate, for the great talk. And allow me to say that your book was the reason I joined the program itself. And I love every part of it. I have a few questions here about the practicality of implementation. So I totally agree that, in my opinion, and we have discussed this in the previous session related to doughnut economy, is that for me, it's about awareness and ultimate wisdom, about balance between, about answering a question about when it's enough. So we can answer this in many aspects of life, but we seem ignorant to answer that in terms of money, power. We don't know, or we play ignorant to answer when it's enough. So in my opinion, it's about knowing when it's enough and to collaborate and support communities and neighborhood. I think with that philosophy, it's part of the spirit of doughnut economy. Yeah. And totally agree that it requires a crisis to change any system, or sometimes a disaster, because convincing current players or stakeholders to use different tools without regard to GDP alone or revenue generation or maximizing revenues is a bit difficult. And I'm not sure about where G20 stands with doughnut economy. I'm not sure if they have heard of this concept or not, but it's all about GDP and revenue growth on that regard. So my question is about the distributed model, because during the course and from the book, we've heard, especially with the MDDI course, we learned about many potential opportunities that might scale and change how we live to the positive way. But in my opinion, and I couldn't get a specific knowledge about how it ticks in relation to creating economies. So we understand how corporate world work, how they maximize revenues. Myself, I'm a student of finance, and been raised on the business model tactics and how to maximize revenues. But how distributed model would compete to have that substitute model that you have kindly discussed. I haven't been able to find any tangible examples or success stories that might compete to convince all systems to shift with or without disaster to the new model. The second thing is it mandatory to be donut aligned, if I may say, to have a distributed model? Can we use conventional model, but with so closed loop, etc., but with taking into consideration other pillars in the economy, because it's more practical not to be perfect. And I think that's for me.
Great questions, Mo. Thank you. Should I answer those straight away, or Ginger's first?
I think it would be nice to have Ginger's inputs.
Okay.
And then it's time to be also use time wisely,
Yep.
Ginger,
Yep.
and to make sure that Kate can have time to react. Go ahead,
Okay.
Ginger.
Hi,
Yeah, I'll make it short. So, Kate, I'm fascinated by that map where we have like the overshooting advanced right, country and the other emerging economies and country. So I would love to learn more about how to not convince, but probably like plan wise, or how it works for these emerging economy to not overshoot this way, because that's kind of what the mass society or the mass media in terms of what advanced society looks like. Like, instead of shooting this way, going this way. Because what I've also kind of seen around the different communities is that they strive to go this way, right? Because that in the optics of the world is the more advanced civilization.
Whoa, great questions. Wow. Okay, Mo, thank you for those really interesting reflections. I agree. The ultimate of probably all of this work is the question that each person, community, society needs to ask is, how much is enough? When is it enough? How do we create that? I'm aware in the English language, I don't think we have really great language around that. In France, there's now a very public conversation around sobriété, right? Sobriety. Now, if you say this is a sober society in English, people think you're saying we don't drink alcohol, right? Because that's what we mean by sober. But in French, they've given it this new meaning of it's enough. I don't need more. It's enough. In Sweden, they say lagom. I'm sure there are many other cultures that have this spirit of enough. And I think actually Western society particularly needs to rediscover this and relearn this. But it's a profound one, I think, underneath all of it, underneath the design of finance and everything, it sits this question. And when do I know that I and we have enough? Planetary boundaries definitely tell us, people, there needs to be a point of enough. Otherwise, you go way beyond and you destroy. So I think that's a very, very profound point. On the G20, we haven't engaged with the G20, but somebody recently said, hey, you should make the D20. What if you took the 20 countries that are closest to living in the donut and they made the D20? I think that's such a great idea, because couldn't we all learn something from the nations that are at least closest, whether they're from low, middle or high income, but they're closer than others, or that if we track over time that they are moving towards, what are they doing? And actually this I'll touch here on Ginger's question of, what are they doing? The point you're making around middle income countries, I'll bring that image back. I know what you're talking to, right? It's this image. What would it mean for these reorient countries. I think you're saying that these are the major emerging economies. They are laying down their road infrastructure or their transport. They're laying down housing, energy systems. This is where the major investments of the world are happening right now. So big decisions. And what would it mean for them to aspire to be leaders into that reorient era rather than be pushed and by consumerism and towards the lifestyle, the excessive lifestyles that we see in those now needing to reduce countries? Really profound question. And how can we're hoping in our team to start bringing out examples of countries from within each of these clusters that are leaders in their cluster to be a new form of inspiration for each other, rather than everybody looking at, US, Canada, Australia, kind of totally unsustainable lifestyle. I think that's a great point, actually. And I'll just finish with what Mo was saying about distributed systems. You're saying, can a system that's not maximizing profit, like what's it after instead, and can it compete? Well, it's great that Erinch is now here, because he's going to speak exactly around what do different business models look like that actually their aim is to be distributive. Their aim is to be regenerative. We meet entrepreneurs and founders who say, oh, the donut, it just looks like the symbol of my business. That's why we exist. We're using business as a vehicle to bring about these changes. And it's a thrill when we meet those folks, because that they're, from here right down to the deep design, they're here for totally different reasons. So I'll leave that for Erinch to pick up, and you can all go further into that. You said, I just want to pick up on the last point you made, like closed loop. I showed kind of closed loop, the kind of corporate circularity and the common circularity. And you made a really good point of, is it more practical? I think it's definitely more practical for any one company to say, can't be bothered to work with the entire ecosystem. Just send it back to us, just bring it back to us. But we know that every Western consumer household has more like 10,000 products. There's no way that we're going to send 10,000 things back to 10,000 different manufacturers. And I always think, well, nature would laugh at us. Nature doesn't turn a daffodil comes back as another daffodil, or a peacock, when it dies, comes back as another peacock. Nature takes things down to those building blocks. So that most ultimately practical of life on Earth is going to be open systems. I think it's inevitable that we begin with these more closed loop companies that want to get ahead, and also, by the way, want to protect their IP, and they want to get, do well by doing good. They will do the closed loop. That's why I love the work of Fab City and of WikiHouse and others, and the open circularity design movement, because it makes sense, right? When you look at it as an earthling, it makes sense. And how can we celebrate the companies? Erinch probably will show you an example of a company called Houdini, a Swedish sportswear company that make things either from wool and tencel, which are organic fibers, or from nylon. They separate them. But Houdini also put their patterns in the commons. They share their patterns, because they say, there's no way we can do this as one company alone. We can't be a circular economy company alone. It takes the ecosystem to make the company. So they're trying to call others into it with them. So maybe we'll get some pioneers who go closed loop early. But, if you want to run fast, run alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think it's going to be really true of the circular economy. Let me finish there. Thank you for great questions. I'm so glad Erinch is here, because he can dive you into the world of business, which takes us right into the deep design. I will stop here and hand over to, I don't know whether you're carrying on this call or we're having to jump to another call. I'll leave it to Erinch and Josefina to tell the next instruction. But really lovely to join you all. And I hope every time more and more collaboration between Deal and Fab, because it's a fab deal, hey? It's a fab deal to work together.
Thank you so much, Kate. It was great having you. Thank you so much, Erinch. Thank you so much also for jumping into this session. We will jump over to the other one, and we will see you all there. The link is in the chat. Thank you once again, Kate. It was great having you. You're such an inspiration.
My pleasure. I'm totally inspired by you folks. It's what keeps us all going, right? It's the reciprocity of inspiration.
Completely.
So please, let's keep it going round. Lovely to see you all. Bye.
Completely. Thank you.